Hello and welcome to the June edition of the University of Strathclyde's Inspiring Conversations. I'm Manish Joshi, Chief Executive of Strathclyde Students Union, and in this episode of Inspiring Conversations, I'm delighted to be joined by Ian Ritchie. Ian is one of Scotland's leading entrepreneurs and over the past 30 years has helped build Scotland as a centre for innovative high-growth technology companies. He has been instrumental in developing over 50 startups and served on the boards of Scottish Enterprise, the Scottish Funding Council and the co-chair of the Scottish Science Advisory Board. Ian was awarded a CBE in the 2003 New Year's Honours List for services to enterprise and education. Ian is a Senior Enterprise Fellow at the University of Strathclyde, where he is part of a group of inspirational entrepreneurial leaders who are working to help inspire the next generation of budding entrepreneurs. Welcome, Ian, and
Hi.
Thank you for joining us today. So, Ian, we mentioned in the intro there that you're one of Scotland's leading entrepreneurs. How did you get into being an entrepreneur and who or what inspired you on that path?
Yeah, it was a lucky accident, I suppose. I mean, I did computer science.
Okay.
I went to Heriot-Watt to do computer science. Heriot-Watt and St Andrews were the only ones doing computer science, of course, in 1968 when I went. And St Andrews looked like a thinly disguised applied maths course. And I went to Heriot-Watt to discover it was also a thinly disguised applied maths course. But anyway, it set me off. And I worked for ICL, the computer company, for 10 years. At their centre in Dalkeith, just south of Edinburgh. And I've always been really interested in the whole idea of personal computers. And in those days, the late 60s, we were working on the big mainframes, operating systems and stuff like that. But towards the end of my spell at ICL, I got to be the project manager for a new advanced graphics workstation. So this was a powerful, for its day, a powerful computer with a big screen, 300 dot per inch screen, black and white, networked, and and it had windows, and you could use a mouse to select things and so forth. This was early 80s, and this was really one of the first computers of that kind.
Okay.
Now the IBM PC was launched in 81, and the Apple Mac in 84. And we had the skills really to be able to do something about that type of computing, that graphics user type computing. And so we managed to get a company going, and we started the company in 84, just as the Macintosh was launched. And it was a glorious time because really the world of computing was just changing dramatically. I mean, the old way of doing computing where you send punch cards in and you get listings back, that was all going. You were guys just sitting at the computer running it, and it was networked, and it was beginning to do things like emails and stuff, and doing documents in the real kind of the format that a document should look like instead of just type on a screen. And so we decided we had skills in that area, and so we started that company in 84. And 85 we opened our office in Seattle. I always thought that well, for a start, I mean, Scotland's not at the centre of things, but the west coast of the USA is, especially in personal computing. So I always just thought, right away, we've got to do something in the west coast. Actually, the very first month I got on the plane, went over, met a lot of people, and then we, pursued that whole thing. And in the end, there was a guy at Microsoft who was a Scotsman, but he'd been there for 15 years. Well, he'd been in the States for 15 years. And he said, look, why don't I leave Microsoft and join you? And he set up our sales office in Seattle. Okay. And we built the company, and the company looked like a West Coast software company, just happened to be based in Edinburgh.
Right, okay.
But the sales were there, and the manuals were written in American English and printed in American sized paper, and everything looked American. And that was we were the first company to do hypertext, which is what you now know as the World Wide Web. You click on documents, you go from document to document, all that sort of thing. And we did all that. We did it all networked. We did it with embedded video. We did it, all sorts of different things. And we actually even developed a really huge, large-scale version of that based on a markup language we developed. We called it HTML. It's not the same as HTML, but when I bumped into Tim Berners-Lee, he asked me for a copy of the spec. I said to him. So we were pioneers in that area. And then I got a knock on the door one day from, of all places, Panasonic, the Japanese. They were at that time the largest consumer electronics company in the world, and they were interested in investing in us. And I said pretty early on, look, that's not going to work. I mean, either you buy us, or because once a big company like Panasonic is in we're never going to sell to anybody else, you
Uh-huh.
know. So either you buy us or, you know, and they did. So in December '89, we sold the company to Panasonic. And then I got free about 2 years later. And I went on to what I've been doing ever since, which is really getting involved in startup companies. So as you mentioned, since then I've done about 50 startups. As an angel investor, quite often as the first chairman, I'm the startup guy.
Right, okay.
I do the first couple of few years until you get to a stage where you're beginning to make a dent and people recognize what you're doing. And then you can bring, I mean, one good example of that was a company I chaired, spun out of the EMI research labs at Hounslow, that did audio technology. And they had technology that put a sound field around you with just headphones. And I chaired that company for, 3-4 years. And then at that point, we were able to attract the ex-chief executive of Bang & Olufsen as chairman.
Okay.
And then the company went on to be sold and so forth. And that's the kind of typical pattern I've been involved in. I tend to be the startup chairman. And then I, you know, try and guide the company to build its team, get the whole team right, get the business model right.
Yeah.
That's always the important thing. And you'd be surprised, but more often than not, companies don't do what they say they're going to do when they start.
Yeah.
They what they call pivot. And you build something. I mean, in my company, we were going to do a big document management system to create technical manuals and things. And my first trip to the States, I found lots of people doing that and better funded than us. And I thought, that's not going to work. And instead of that, we latched onto this hypertext technology. And we were the pioneers in that. So that was the way, you know, we pivoted to that because there was an opportunity of being, even though you're a tiny company with, I don't know, 20 people, you can actually be the number one company in the world in a sector if you're the only people in that sector.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, and so we started getting work with Hewlett Packard, with Ford Motor, with Bell Atlantic, with IBM, with Apple. You know, we were doing a lot of stuff for a lot of big companies because we were the innovative bunch. So that's that led me on to what I've been doing ever since, and I've always been doing There's always been a good flow of really interesting companies in Scotland, and getting them from, you know, sort of two guys in a room, and it's usually two guys, towards a company that's actually beginning to make a dent in the world. That's my sort of area. That's what I try and do.
Well, it's fascinating, and I think you've given me lots of tangents we can go off on, I think, in some of this. I don't know if you're a big fan of TV, but one of my favourite shows is one called *Halt and Catch Fire*.
Oh, yeah.
Have you seen it?
Absolutely.
And obviously, for people who haven't seen it, it's basically about the dawn of the computer age, and a lot of what you talked about there are characters in that show. And so I guess my question for you is, like, what was the energy like around that time? Because I guess for many of us, we've grown up now as digital natives, and it's just second nature. But when you watch something like that dramatised as it is, obviously the energy and just, there's a lot of just like really audacious, like, people just go for it, don't they?
No, in fact, *Halt and Catch Fire* is a kind of a bit of an inspiration for me because it covers that whole period. When the personal computer was born, 81 through to about mid-90s, when things were pretty much settled. We knew what was, you know, I mean, obviously things have advanced since then, but not new breakthroughs, not new ways of doing stuff. And in fact, I've actually written a book, which will be coming out later this year. Basically around our web technology business and how we built that. But really, it covers that period, the golden age of the personal computer, when it arrived. And *Halt and Catch Fire* was a great example. The first thing they did was an IBM PC clone, and then they did a word processor, and then they did a hypertext product. Slightly weird. And then finally they did a multiplayer gaming system. And it was the same people every time trying, and they never worked. They never succeeded. But they struggled to make it. And all the people in there are very recognisable. I mean, it really was like that.
Well, that's what I was wondering. And I guess your point you made earlier on, which strikes me, is about getting the right people and the right team and the culture in the organisation. I think those seem like critical ingredients. Like, you can have the idea, but it's not going to get you where it needs to be if you don't have the right people.
And the thing we don't do very well in Scotland is obviously the sales and marketing, and we're great at technology. We've got great technology. We've always had good technology, and so you can get, you know, really good technology, but to get it to work, you've got to actually find people who are ambitious and have got management skills and so forth. And one of my problems these days is we're losing so much of the corporate world in Scotland. You know, 25 years ago, we had two of the biggest banks in the world, Bank of Scotland and Royal Bank.
Yeah.
We had the biggest life association in Europe, Standard Life. We had Scottish Power, the big power company. We had Scottish Newcastle, one of the biggest brewers. And recently, and they've all gone, and recently we've lost a Greco. We're losing Stagecoach. You know, we're losing our corporate world, and we're a branch factory economy, really, in Scotland. And there's plenty of employment, but the branch factory employment.
Yeah.
So people will work in Scotland for Amazon, for Google, and for all these sort of companies, and doing great stuff. But they're not making money in Scotland. You know, the biggest video game in the world is Grand Theft Auto, written in Edinburgh. But of course, all the profits go to New York. You know, and that's really a big problem. And getting the sort of corporate, running a big organisation, doing a big marketing campaign, that sort of skill, we don't tend to have much in Scotland, and that's a big problem for us. I mean, my solution was to set up our sales and marketing in Seattle and hire there from people, because Seattle was a burgeoning tech. It's not just Microsoft. I mean, you've got Boeing was there, you've got Starbucks, you've got Costco, you've got companies that are coming out your ears, really, that are doing really well from that part of the world. And so hiring people who know how to brand, how to market, how to position, all that sort of thing. And that's been my kind of mission ever since. A lot of the companies I've got involved in, we put the sales and marketing somewhere else. Digital Bridges was a company we did that did games for mobile phones. And we put their head sort of sales and marketing in London, because London was a great centre for mobile phones globally, Vodafone and so forth. Another company, we did medical imaging, a company called Voxar, and we did medical imaging from MRIs, CT machines, things like that. Well, we put our sales marketing in Boston, because that was kind of the obvious place to do it. And so I think there's a lot of scope for building businesses in Scotland, but putting the key bit where the skills are, or where the market is, for that matter. And that's what we've been doing. That's what I've been doing ever since. And actually, that's what we do now. I'm non-exec chairman of a company called Term PLC, which is a quoted investment company. And the chief executive of that company is US-based, Californian-based. And we are taking British companies and taking them to the world. In fact, there's one here in Glasgow, in Blythewood Square, a company called Talking Medicines. I was one of the first investors. They're now invested by Tern, and they're they just have set up their office in New Jersey, because they service the pharmaceutical industry. And the pharmaceutical industry is based around that part of the world. So it's that kind of model I think works well.
And is there anything on like the policy side of things, or I guess the working environment? Because I definitely we have a challenge in terms of brain drain, retaining talent in Scotland. We've obviously got some really successful spin-outs over the last few years that have floated. Skyscanner's one that comes to mind, and it's obviously done that. But how do we, what are your thoughts on how we keep some of that talent here, how we grow it, and how we actually become one of these centres maybe for excellence where people actually come and set their business up here?
That's actually the biggest problem. We lose a lot of talent. I mean, I hear politicians saying there's a skills shortage in Scotland. Well, there is sort of, but there isn't a skills shortage of Scottish people. There's plenty of very, very high-skilled Scottish people, this university and others.
Yes, absolutely.
Generate really top-notch people. But they tend to have to move away for a corporate career. I mean, I'm lucky in a way, or maybe I've just made the choice, but I didn't move away, I stayed. But a lot of people of my generation, my classmates, moved off, went off for careers around the world. A lot of them are coming back now, retiring, bringing their money back. It's good, but it'd be good if they'd come back earlier and contributed. And I think there's a big issue there, and we're not doing a lot about it. I mean, you said about policy. I've been involved in the policy scene for a long time. I mean, I was board of the Scottish Enterprise, but I've been pretty much anything enterprise related. I've been on the board of Enterprise Scotland, or Young Enterprise, or business forums and all sorts of things like that. There's just recently been an enterprise paper from the Scottish Government, and it's so familiar. It's just the same stuff.
It feels like we're kind of playing the same old record
We're
over and
playing
over
the same
again.
old
And
record, yeah.
the challenges that we face globally,
Yeah.
whether it's climate change, Brexit,
Yeah.
war, uncertainty, we don't seem like we're coming up with radical solutions. To
No,
try
we
and
don't.
tackle
And
some of these things.
And I get really fed up with the kind of the pious, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. But at the same time, I see initiatives that really do work, and I know they work, closing down for lack of funding. So, for example, the Enterprise Fellowship Programme the Royal Society of Edinburgh used to run was funded by Scottish Enterprise, and it took burgeoning businesses, mostly people like postdocs at universities, with a good idea, and give them mentorship and give them a year's salary and kind of force them to turn away from the academic world and become businesses. And that has generated over the years dozens of companies.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other thing is the Saltire Fellowship. I don't know if you
I'm
know.
familiar with
I've been
it.
based across the road here. And the Saltire Fellowship used to send people to Babson College for 3 months, give them an internship in Boston, and then back here, an internship here. And it turned them into international business people. They really got a flavour of what it's like to do business worldwide.
Yeah.
And that's now foundering for lack of funding. And you think, we're not talking about a lot of money here.
No, I know.
By government standards, $500,000 would do a hell of it, and we really make a huge dent and create tomorrow's leaders.
Yeah.
And the problem is, we don't have leaders. People have had to move away to develop their career. It doesn't matter what you learn, what you do at university. You're not a real manager until you've spent about 10 years, and knocking real problems
and,
about.
Absolutely.
Grafting, coping with downturns, all these sort of issues, And the ideal time to start a company is really your mid-30s to mid-40s. That's the best time, because then you've got the skills and you've still got the energy.
Yeah.
And you can drive, and you're capable of, I couldn't do what I did then. I'd come home, see the kids to bed, go back into work for till 2 o'clock in the morning. You can't do that. Get on a plane every week and go places and do stuff. So it's a young man's game, but you need the experience, and that's the issue: is how do we get these people now? I've got a solution. I keep telling people it, but nobody seems to pay much attention.
Let's hear it.
Well, it's not new. They do it in New Zealand. They do it in Ireland. They've done it in the Netherlands. And I've got a real first-hand experience of this, because I'm chairman of a wee company in Edinburgh called Krotos. And Krotos does audio technology, audio effects. So we do blockbuster movie effects. I mean, we turned Idris Elba into a panther for Lion King, we did the effects when the dragons in Game of Thrones fly through an ice storm. We did the sound of that ice storm. This is pretty good stuff. And the guy who founded this company is Greek. He's from Athens, and he came over to do a master's at Edinburgh University in audio technology, and he stayed and started a company. And he's done amazing stuff. I mean, we're in pretty much all the big blockbuster movies, and a lot of the blockbuster games as well. And we do all these audio effects and things. And anyway, he's now, as of last month, gone back to Athens, because he's running his company from home anyway, on Zoom mostly. Yeah. And he said, I can do that from there, so fair enough. And his girlfriend's Australian, so she quite fancies the weather, so that's...
that's one of the challenges for Scotland.
The key thing is, the Greek government give them half income tax for 7 years. So they want their entrepreneurs back.
Okay.
They want their entrepreneurs who have gone around the world, like Scottish people.
Quite a big diaspora community.
Exactly.
Yes, absolutely.
And the Irish, and then people in the, all these smaller economies that get sucked into a London or a Brussels or a Boston or whatever. They're all beginning to work on this idea of, let's get these people back. And I think of somebody maybe graduated from here 10 years ago. They're now living in London, or they're actually probably living in Hempstead because they can't afford, or they want a garden,
Yes,
So they're commuting every day into London. The kids are at a school that they're not all that happy with. They're miles away from their parents.
Yeah.
Wouldn't they love to come back to Scotland if they had a chance? And I think we could get them. I think we could get a lot of these people back. I went to Dublin for a meeting, and I found a couple of guys there who'd just come back from Boston, and they had, they'd been bloodied in the high tech world in the States. They were back in Dublin, and they were building tech businesses. And I think that's the sort of we could do that.
That's not a very difficult policy lever, and the
It's not
Scottish
difficult.
government, as far as I understand, have the power to do that.
Well, they've got tax raising powers, but they've also got powers to do things. They could do pilot. They could do a pilot. So they could say, right, next we'll do 5 a year for the next 5 years, and it costs them $100,000 a person because they'd have to give them a relocation thing, a salary cover, and help with recruitment and all that sort of thing. But really tying them up with, say, one of the teams here that are developing a new, inspirational technology.
Yep.
You need a good CEO to build that business and take it somewhere.
Absolutely.
And getting somebody back who's got that experience, So I think that would work. And I think it also fits in with the government's so-called levelling up policy. Because they say, we want to level up the rest of the country. And the fact of the matter is, people are sucked into the golden triangle of Oxford, Cambridge, London. And they stay there because there's so much innovation, so much enterprise in that area. They can all get jobs, and if they lose a job, they can get another job. So they stay there. If we could get them back to not just Scotland, if you get them back to Newcastle, get them back to Manchester or Leeds or whatever, that would be a good thing to do. I can't see the UK government doing that.
No, and I think there's also an element sometimes of golden handcuffs, isn't there? Because the salary differential sometimes is higher in the southeast, but then so is the cost of living, so is the cost of housing.
Oh no, you would swap. I mean, my daughter worked in London for a wee while, and her company said, "We're opening an office in Manchester. Anybody interested?" Me. So she's now in Manchester. She can afford to buy her own house, and she didn't have the transport costs, and she was paying like £850 for one room.
It's the quality of life. I've lived in London for a while myself, and I had intended to stay there, and then remember coming back and realised you didn't need to spend an hour and a half to go to IKEA, or that your pals that you grew up with were down the road, and your parents were around, and actually, and there is, I think sometimes, I think when you're building a business, you're very focused on that, but there's a lot more to life as well, and I think it's having that holistic element to go and, am I dealing with my well-being? Because actually there's a lot of entrepreneurs who are burning out, and who aren't coming back to build 50 businesses because their experience maybe hasn't been that great, because the culture's not right, or you can't feed your kids off equity, or there are challenges, and I think sometimes we talk about entrepreneurship and we see the Musks and the Bezoses of this world, and people think, that's what I want to be, but actually, do you want to be that, or do you actually want to create value?
You probably don't. To be fair, I will freely admit, I couldn't run a £10 million company, a £10 million turnover company. My companies went to about 3 or 4 million, and that was the time when I, should move aside, bring in somebody who likes to manage. I like to build things. I like to create things, and you've got to accept, especially, and it's something that I think even universities are now beginning to understand this. I think it's the academic, the postdoc that starts a company is not probably the person to take it all the way through. That's very rare. There was only happened in one case. I mean, I've done 50 companies. In one particular company, I met him in a university lab, and he took the company all the way through to an exit. But that was very unusual. Most of the time, you have to bring in, and even there, you had to bring in a good COO, Chief Operating Officer, to run the day-to-day business. You have to do that, and you've got to understand that if you want to create wealth and make yourself rich, the best thing to do is make your company rich and bring in somebody who can make that happen. You know.
And there's definitely something for diversity of thought, experience. And I think the best teams are the ones where you actually realise your weaknesses and you compensate for that. You don't try and lean into that and try and be better at things. If you're not into finance, get a good CFO.
Oh, absolutely,
So you've obviously been instrumental in 50 startups is quite a number. What does success look like for a business or company then, from your experience? You've kind of touched on a wee bit of that, but
I mean, most of the times it is an exit. It's an exit finally to a business that acquires you, because taking a company, I mean, I've floated a couple of companies. It's not an easy life to be a public company.
Yeah.
You're subject, and tech is not popular in the UK, so investors don't really like tech. I remember looking for, following for years Wilson Microelectronics in Edinburgh, which is a company that made audio chips. They went, and almost every smartphone had their audio chips.
Yeah.
Most hi-fi systems have got these hi-fi. There'll be audio chips, Wilson chips there. And their, share price went up and down, up and down. If Apple announced they were moving to another chip, and and their share price plummeted. And the fact of the matter was that 80% of the smartphones in the world use Wilson chips, but not Apple anymore. And that was the big, So it's tough doing that. And so in most cases, it's an exit. If you can build the business big enough to make a dent, I mean, obviously Skyscanner was a good example of that, and FanDuel was the other one. And I was actually one of the first investors in FanDuel.
Okay.
And it's now a $20 billion business. I mean, it's part of Paddy Power. It's Flutter, they call it now.
Right.
And they're the leaders in sports gaming in the States. You won't have heard of them,
No,
but they're massive in the States. And you basically put your fantasy teams together.
Right. All right.
And they play them.
So
and
baseball, American football, all that stuff. Right. Okay.
Yeah. They're doing incredibly well. And that was an Edinburgh startup company. So, but then on the other hand, we've had 2 unicorns in Scotland, FanDuel and Skyscanner. In the same time, Estonia's had about 10 unicorns, and it's only 1.5 million people.
Okay.
So we're not batting.
Quite punching where we should be, are we?
We're not. And I don't know what the problem is. I think maybe we're the wrong, I don't know. Well, you look at Ireland and it's not true. I was going to say we're the wrong size because people can think, I can service the market here, and that's a decent enough business. Whereas somebody in Estonia will think, well, there's no point just selling to Estonia. We've really got to take on the world, And so they will set up their offices in New York or San Francisco or whatever. But then the Irish don't think that way. The Irish have been thinking, big.
Yeah.
So I don't know why we've got this. I mean, it didn't occur to me at all. I mean, I thought when I started my company in '84, I thought, well, the UK at that time, we were doing personal computer software. The UK was about 4% of the global market for personal computer software. So why would you start there? And Scotland was 0.4% and a very uninnovative 0.4% as well. Why would you start there? Let's start where people are waking up every morning thinking, my company could be smarter if I bought the latest technology, which is what people think in the States. So that's the way you think. I don't know why people don't do more of that. I mean, I suppose it's scary. You've got to go out there, you've got to find the right people. You're going to make a mistake the first time. You're going to have to sack the first one and hire another one. And,
Do you think there's a cautiousness built into Scottish psyche?
We're very risk averse.
Risk-averse, and you don't want to make a mistake because there's been a lot written recently, hasn't there, about Glasgow and Edinburgh being, great homes for startups, for tech startups, for innovation. Obviously, we've got the Glasgow City Innovation District right here. Riverside innovation along the Clyde, and then I know there's a lot in Edinburgh, and as you say, the universities are at the heart of much of this, in terms of anchoring a lot of that,
of course.
Investing, building buildings, but also attracting talent. But, it's interesting to think that we've maybe had 2 unicorns in the last 25 years, and it's not all about, I guess, that kind of hyper-capitalist element, but we're certainly maybe not spinning out as much as we should be, and the ecosystem isn't as developed as it could be.
I mean, any city can point to things and say this is a success and we're doing really well, and we are. I mean, we're not. Look, we're not. We've got a lot of the right things. We've got all the.
It feels like the foundations are good. Yeah,
it's like fantastic universities. We do have money. I mean, we can raise money in Scotland. I mean, some of the best investment companies in the world are based in Scotland. I mean, Ivory and Syme in Edinburgh, Scottish Equity Partners in Glasgow, they invest typically 20 million, 30 million in businesses. Unfortunately, most of these businesses are not in Scotland because they can't find them. But they're based here,
Yes.
So there's no shortage of skills, there's no shortage of money, there's a shortage of ambition and management ability. That's the key thing. And of course, it's just a natural thing that the I mean, it's the same anywhere in the world. In France, everybody gets dragged into Paris. In the Netherlands, people get, well, to go to Eindhoven probably for the sort of technology businesses and stuff. So it's just the nature of things, and we've got to try and fight that. But it's so difficult compared to the strength of what I would call the Golden Triangle, the Oxford, Cambridge, London. All the dynamic, all the wealth in the UK so much of the wealth in the UK is created there.
Yeah.
The rest of England is quite poor. Wales is quite poor. Scotland is actually pretty average for the UK. So we're prosperous. I mean, we're relatively a prosperous country. But a lot of that is to do with good branch factory activity, good skill sets, all these sort of things. Foreign direct investment. We proudly boast we're the best place for foreign direct investment a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
And we are. But that creates jobs.
Yes.
It doesn't create wealth. And I think we owe it to our children, frankly, to create wealth, to create an economy that can support good roads, good schools, good environment, good health systems, and so forth. That's really important. And I don't know that we pay enough attention to that. But anyway, fine words.
No, I think that's great. And I guess just to wrap up, so you're one of Strathclyde Senior Enterprise Fellows, and great to have you here. You're obviously part of that role is inspiring that next generation of innovators and leaders. Can you tell us a bit more about the role and what excites you about working with the university?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, Sir Jim MacDonald is the leader here, and he's driving things forward. And he's always been, I mean, I've known him for years, and he's always been very ambitious and trying to create things. He's also president of the Royal Academy of Engineering, which I'm a fellow of, and he's doing good stuff there as well. So he's such a driven person, and it's good to see, we're actually creating pretty much every subject you do at Strathclyde is a vocational. You've got a career ahead.
Our
of you.
industry engagement and the ability for placements and things, I think, are pretty much unparalleled in the sector, and I think that's why people come here. That's why students come here, because they know they can get a job at the end of it.
Exactly, that's right. And I mean, I've been involved in Glasgow businesses for years. There's nothing that makes Glasgow any different from anywhere else, really.
No, not
it's
at all.
just as enterprising and just as go-ahead. In fact,
people are friendlier. People are friendlier.
That is actually true. I have to admit that's true. But the whole, Glasgow used to be built half the boats in the world. Built all the railway engines. It used to be a massive enterprise business area, and the deindustrialization of the 20th century didn't do it any favours.
No,
and we need to rebuild now. It's time.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right, and I'm excited to see what you can do and how you can support the university in that ambition. And it's really been great talking to you today. So thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
No worries. And that's it for June's Inspiring Conversation. Thank you for joining us, and remember to tune in next month where we'll be joined by another inspiring entrepreneurial leader. To find out more about Strathclyde Inspire and our Inspiring Conversation series, please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn and Twitter, or search for Strathclyde Inspire on the University of Strathclyde website. Thank you. Bye now.